Thank you, Debbie. So Debbie already told me that she has been awake since 3 in the morning. So we're going to allow her to. She's had a rough couple of days, but and I know for many of the Otterbein folks, it's been an intense period. We'll be welcoming our freshmen this week, and classes will begin next week. We did our big welcome back yesterday, so I appreciate everybody coming out early this morning because I know everybody has a full day ahead of them. When Debbie asked me to speak, I thought about a couple of topics related to leadership, and I've heard many of our speakers, and they've been great. We really appreciate bringing such wonderful speakers to campus and such wonderful leaders. But I guess I've been too immersed in Otterbein history not to think about leadership in a historic context at Otterbein. So this will begin with, Debbie's already done the alma mater. Otterbein is the only institution in the entire world, I think, which owns an alma mater which is called the Love Song. It's called the Otterbein Love Song. And from the time you get on campus, you begin to see, I talked with new faculty this week, and they said, this is a different kind of place, and it is a different kind of place. So what I'm going to do at the beginning is talk a little bit about the history of leadership at Otterbein, and then fast forward into what it means at Otterbein today, and how we are struggling, working, and I guess strategizing about how to build leaders for the 21st century. So as Debbie said, we were founded a long time ago, 1847, April 26th. This was during a time we came from a religious heritage, so a lot of our values and our culture today really harken back to that period of time. And it was the first U.S. institution that was actually founded as coeducational. So there are certainly institutions who admitted women prior to 1847, but they began as male-only institutions. So Otterbein was the first really to say, and this was based on our heritage from the church, equality was important. So women could play leadership roles in the church, just as they could play leadership roles at Otterbein. Women were on the faculty, along with men, again, sort of an unheard of concept at the time. That was the original faculty. And our first 2 graduates, even though we were coeducational, our first two graduates were women in 1857. So as you can see, people stopped and started. They didn't go. It wasn't 4 years straight through. It wasn't post-secondary option and college credit plus graduate early. It was, go home and work on the farm for a while, and if you can scrape together the money, you can come to school and try to finish your degree. So it took a while. But Sarah Jenny Miller and Kate Winter Hanby were our first 2 graduates. The Hanby name, for those of you familiar with Westerville, figures prominently in our history, and Kate Winter, who lived in a house about 2 doors down from where I live on Northwest Street, married Ben Hanby, a very famous name in all kinds of ways. This is interesting to me. Again, Amanda Hanby, Billheimer, so a daughter of one of the founders of our institution. We sent faculty and students to Sierra Leone in the 1860s. We actually sent a first group of people over in the 1850s. So we were doing global education and global engagement before global education was cool. Okay, so, and we sent students and faculty over. So we've had a long-standing multiple generations since the 1850s with graduates who've come to us from Sierra Leone. And this is what, I guess when I was hired, I hadn't seen this before I got here, but I started doing a little more research after I arrived, and I found this from Time magazine, January 5th, 1968. You can see LBJ was Man of the Year. But this was the ad that kind of gave me an inspiration for what we could do at Otterbein. So can you read it from the back or not? Okay, so the idea was that coeducation talks about practically invented it. When we opened our doors, we opened them to both men and women. As you go on down through this, it talks about opening in 1847. But if you look at that last paragraph, well, I guess the end of the first paragraph, when the prevailing opinion was that brains were male or female and the best ones were always male. This is a kind of edgy ad, I think, for 1968, sort of putting us out there in terms of what we were trying to achieve. So if you look at the last couple of lines there, the idea of independent thinking. We're based on the church, oriented to the world. Our most cherished tradition is the encouragement we give to creative thought and action. And then I love this last line, write our admissions off, we can always use another leader. 1968. And this was a time when there was a lot of talk, obviously, about coeducation. Many women's institutions and men's institutions were thinking about moving to a coeducational environment. And this was Otterbein. And I don't really know who was responsible for this ad. I'm sure there's a story there. And I'm sure lots of eyes looked at that ad before it went into Time magazine. This was a full-page ad. And it was really kind of out there. But as I read through that, I thought, you know, as you look back at the history of Otterbein, there's this idea of leadership. There's this idea of being a leader in the field of higher education, that admitting women and men on equal grounds, hiring women on the faculty, and this idea of looking for leaders, trying to encourage independent thinking. In my mind, Otterbein was a very progressive institution in its time. And as I began to think about what we could do here, I began to think about the opportunities for re-embracing, sort of reaffirming that heritage, not being just another institution in Central Ohio, not being just another beautiful, quiet, peaceful village located campus, not just being another institution where there were great experiences and great academic opportunities, but a special, unique heritage, a special, unique character, a commitment to progressive values, a commitment to being an innovator, and a commitment to inspiring leadership within our student body and within our faculty and staff. So that led to a process. And when I guess I should say when I arrived, I've always had good timing in my life. So I landed at Otterbein just as the recession was hitting. So our endowment fell in half. And the weekend between, I presented at the Ohio University Board of Trustees, presenting as Executive Vice President and Provost. I presented the budget, and we, on Friday afternoon, then went home to find moving trucks already on their way to Westerville, unpacked over the weekend, started work on Monday. During that Friday afternoon, the state budget passed, and we lost $1.5 million in student aid. So good timing. So when I came, there was kind of this, you know, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We've got this new president, and she's a woman, and that's the first woman. And we've got some real serious budget issues and student aid issues. And a lot of our families are struggling because people in this recession, people are going to lose jobs, and there's going to be a real challenge. Federal and state aid were being cut, a lot of dire predictions about what was going to happen in the field of higher education. So we started a conversation at that point. So that was 2009. And I spent a lot of time going sort of door to door, department by department, meeting with staff in the functional areas, meeting with faculty around campus, and talking about the future of Otterbein. And this is kind of where we landed. But I don't mean to say sort of started in July, wrote this in August. This was started in July of 2009. And really, we finalized this probably 3 years later in terms of a vision statement. But it was to look back at our history and begin to talk about what that meant today. And so I'll show you both the vision statement and the mission statement. But I wanted to focus on this for just a minute because the leadership theme, you'll see, comes back. It comes back again and again as we talk about our future. So first of all, it was the first time that Otterbein had talked about, and you'll notice it was Otterbein University. So the first year I was here, the board and the president had set the table for going to university, but they kind of wanted to wait till the new president came in. So we voted the first year to become a university. The reason was that we had growing numbers of graduate programs, growing numbers of graduate students, growing numbers of professional programs, and it was really time to look at our identity and be realistic about who we were. We were becoming a university, not a small college in a quiet, peaceful village, and it was time to say that out loud. So we became a university. But it's the first time we talked about national recognition. Many of our programs are nationally recognized, and we recruit nationally, not for all of our programs, but for many of our programs. Most of our students actually come from Central Ohio, but we have aspirations. The vision statement is what we strive for, to become more nationally recognized and more nationally ranked. And then the term model community. This was a phrase that emerged out of these conversations. So the conversations involved meeting with faculty, with staff, with students, with alumni, with community members in Westerville and beyond, certainly with the board, and certainly with the leadership of the institution from the cabinet perspective. But we settled on the idea of, we were seeing a lot of institutions around the country struggling with identity, struggling with money, struggling with what were they going to do to kind of work their way through the recession. And as we looked at what Otterbein represented, it was a lot of core values that were really important from our history and also that we continued to embrace today in terms of our policies and our practices and the way we operated as an institution. Otterbein never did one layoff during the recession, not one. And we didn't give raises every year, but there was plenty of discussion and there was plenty of reflection on whether that was a good decision. One of my first actions as president was to announce that we were going to reduce retirement benefits and we were not going to be giving raises. That was a big day in my life. First time before University Senate to announce that one. But there was a sense of community around what we were trying to do. And so we kind of settled on this idea of what would it mean in higher education? What would be the progressive equivalent of today with universities struggling and a lot of cynicism about higher education, a lot of focus on affordability and access? What could we say and what could we do to set an aspirational goal for us? And we settled on the phrase of a model community. So you will see a lot of signs around campus. In fact, Joan Rocks gave me a little poster on her department's health and sports sciences on what would a model department look like. We now have a Model Citizen Award. So what does a model citizen look like at Otterbein? But it's very values focused, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I didn't finish. Okay, so the community, the model community is of educators, leaders, and learners. So it doesn't really distinguish between faculty and staff and students. Everybody is an educator. Students are as well. I learn as much from my students. Certainly, as I know, leaders, anybody can be a leader, students, faculty, staff, and learners. We all continue to learn. So we really, one of our goals is to be lifelong learners, to continue to change. We're in a field that is extremely dynamic. And if you don't think higher education is dynamic and you think we're stodgy and old and conservative, take a look at some of the new programs coming down the pipeline and some of the new innovative strategies institutions are adopting really to survive in this day and age. And then set the pace for higher education. This is turning back to our history. So we founded ourselves as coeducational, and there's more to that than simply the notion of women being admitted. We admitted African Americans before the Civil War. We recruited Japanese students from the internment camps during World War II. So there's this long history of progressive movements. William Hamby, one of our founders, is quoted in the archives. He was out inciting riots around Prohibition. He was very much in favor of, I always define this as women and children, and fighting against liquor and all of those bad things that men, they would leave work with their pocket full of money and stop at the bar and they'd come home and their families were hungry. And so he was a defender of women and children in the Prohibition movement. A lot of commitment around the suffrage movement. So the institution routinely, and the leadership of the institution, routinely got out in front of these issues. So that idea of being a progressive institution, of embracing those social values and living them by setting the pace for higher education. So key phrases: model community, setting the pace for higher education. Everybody's a part of the community. Everybody's a educator, leader, and learner. And then also, this is, again, from our history, contributing to the common good. So that's something, a phrase that you will just see all over Otterbein. Everything is done to contribute to the common good. So, okay, mission statement, just quickly. You'll notice in the bold, our mission is to prepare graduates to think deeply and broadly, to engage locally and globally, and to advance their professions and communities. So the core educational mission, but again, some of those other phrases, the intentional blending of the liberal arts and professional studies, combined with a unique approach to integrating direct experience into all learning, the context of humane values, educating the whole person, that is those values coming through. And the idea of experiential learning and the integration of classroom and out of classroom learning is, again, part of our history. Our original The original fire department in Westerville was Otterbein students. So that was how they earned their room and board. They lived in the firehouse, and they went out on calls. They drove school buses. A lot of people came to Otterbein unable to afford an education, and they figured out a way working with the city, working with local businesses and industry, finding a way to pay for their education and work their way through school. Okay, we also identified our core values. You'll see diversity, equality, inclusiveness, lifelong learning, opportunity, service, sustainability. No surprises there. Guiding principles, accountability, collaboration, and so forth. All of this is captured in what we call a model community card. So every new employee gets a model community card. It has our core values, our guiding principles, our mission, our vision statement, and then it also has what we consider to be our brand pillars. So we thought, something physical, something everybody could have, something that would orient everybody to the idea of being a citizen in a model community. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the focus on experiential learning. So we talked about people learning and doing at the same time. Our early graduates all went into the ministry, or they went into education pretty much. Some kind of service to the public, the idea was service to others. So we were a college of opportunity for those seeking opportunity, and we were also sending people out into the world to serve others. That was the whole mission. And I guess one of the early letters that I received in 2009 was a letter from a 1938 graduate. And it was beautiful, beautiful penmanship. I mean, it was a beautiful letter. I've saved it. But what she said in the letter, I pull this out every now and then. She said, "I look into your eyes in the picture of towers, and I see someone who's going to forge the future for Otterbein." I still get teary thinking about it. But it was this beautiful letter about what she did initially. She went to a Native American reservation. She was called to serve. So she went as a teacher to a Native American reservation and taught there for a few years. And then she was called to serve in Alaska. The native populations needed education there. So it was this history of serving others, of having a calling and going out into the world. So when our faculty and their wisdom redid our curriculum, moving from quarters to semesters a few years ago, they decided, we have this long history of experiential learning, a focus on experiential learning, and what we should do is make that real. So what they did was they identified and documented 5 kinds of experiences. These are called the cardinal experiences because we're cardinals, but also because they are considered to be essential experiences. So as our students go through school, go through their education, these are the 5 experiences that they have deemed, our faculty has deemed to be essential. Now, some of these are performed as part of classes. So you might do a class that has a research project, for example. But we encourage students to do something on their own as well in terms of undergraduate research or creative work. Internships and professional experiences, of course, this is very timely, but our history was one around students going out into the world and practicing and working while they were still in school. Global and intercultural engagement, well, I told you we sent people to Sierra Leone in the 1850s, so we've been doing this for a while, okay? But we think in the 21st century, educating students to be global citizens is going to be critical to their success. Leadership and citizenship, part of our history. Again, one of the experiences that we ask students to fulfill. And then community engagement. We're always on the President's honor roll of community engaged institutions. We continue to win awards. We're a Carnegie recognized community engaged institution. So those 5 cardinal experiences are manifest in the student experience. They might be done in class, but they might be done out of class, mostly out of class. This is important because when you think about education today and you think about setting the pace for education, lots of institutions have some of those. But I don't know of any other institution that sort of makes a composite and says, these are the 5 things you need to do. You need to figure out a way to do them. If you're smart, and if you sit down with your faculty advisor early in your career, you can figure out a way to do a major that plays on these 5 experiences. So you may be a major in a particular field, and you find 5 of those experiences that create a whole, an organic whole, out of the way you approach your education. We hope it's not completely arbitrary, so that students have a keen interest in something, a passion for something, and they figure out ways to align what they do in the classroom with what they do outside the classroom. And that's not enough. the Otterbein way is always to measure these things. So we actually have faculty who document the 5 experiences. So you can't just say, I did leadership, I went to a meeting last week, and I did it, I led the meeting, and so I get my leadership cord. At graduation, you get a cord for the experiences. No, you have to write an essay, you have to write a reflection on it, you have to record that in your e-portfolio, so it's a digital record of what you did. You have to reflect on it and figure out how can I demonstrate that this was truly a leadership experience. And a faculty member gives it the signature of approval. So when you graduate, if you've done 5 cardinal experiences, you graduate with 5 cords and you're asked to stand and be recognized at graduation. So the idea is it's not just, there are certain learning outcomes associated with this. The faculty use those learning outcomes to assess the extent to which students successfully completed these experiences. And they actually talk about them in the classroom. And they help students figure out how to find those 5 experiences that will make the most sense for them. Okay, so let me move along here. Okay, so these are just definitions of what they mean. You can just sort of read through them as I click through, but just to show you, it can be academic or professional in terms of research and creative work, working with faculty. Same thing, the internship might be credit or non-credit, but different programs have different requirements. Global and intercultural engagement, there are various ways to perform that. But we have the blessing of having so many migrant and immigrant communities right here in Central Ohio. You could do your international engagement simply by working with a community group right here. So it's not, you don't have to do a study abroad. Leadership and citizenship, again, many, many ways to fulfill that. And community engagement. The idea here is this is so much a part of our history, but the first Saturday, so this Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, Bob? Our freshmen, we drag them out of bed. If they want a donut, if they want a Schneider's donut, they're dragged out of bed at 8:30. But anyway, the idea is that the first thing they do on campus is they go out into the community and do community service on Saturday morning. So they are enculturated, they are socialized to understand that if you're a student at Otterbein, you're going to be giving. You're going to be giving back in one way or another. So you're going to go out into the community that first Saturday morning. And then our students, we routinely talk about this, but our students, small population, about 2,500 undergrads, 70,000 hours of volunteer service every year to the community. And that's not just Westerville, that is the broader Central Ohio community. So it's a real factor in terms of their education. And we always talk about, this is the history of Otterbein as you go out. And what are you doing? You're serving the common good. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears again here. As I thought about, again, looking at the history, reading that Time magazine ad, thinking about, okay, I'm the first woman president, and I have this letter from this woman in 1938 grad saying she sees the future in my eyes. So, you know, I gotta do something real here. So, and that's not the only letter like that I've received. I mean, it's just our Otterbein alumni are kind of amazing people. But anyway, what I tried to figure out was what could I do that would make the idea of leadership manifest in terms of my own experience here at Otterbein. So I should say I started my career as a high school English teacher. So I've been teaching for way more years than I care to think about. But so as an administrator, I've always taught. I taught at Ohio University as dean of the Scripps College, and then I continued to teach as provost and executive vice president. And I wanted to do that at Otterbein, but I didn't do it the first year because I had other things to do. I had to learn about where we were going to go. But I thought as we were migrating into this semester structure, and we were talking about the 5 cardinal experiences, and we were talking about aligning our learning outcomes and really assessing them, I thought this is a good time. And honestly, the faculty were telling me how hard all this was, and I thought, I know it's hard. And the best way for me to experience that is to jump in and do it with them. So I teach one of our freshmen, our first year seminars. So first class you have at Otterbein, you're going out Saturday morning to do service, and then you meet with your first year instructor. And these are thematic. You have to meet the learning outcomes, but they're thematic goals. So I decided I would do a first year seminar on women in leadership. So every year I have between 15 and 20 young women who have demonstrated leadership skills in high school and are pretty high performing students, and they're recruited they opt into my class. That class is part of a leadership learning community, and John Krendl and Patty Wilson are my colleagues in crime. And I don't know if Wendy's here or not. Wendy Sherman-Heckler's been helping me with the class, more than helping me with the class the last couple of years because I've been traveling more. But so we co-teach our section of Women in Leadership. But the kids all live together. They're in a leadership learning community, so they live together. They have co-curricular activities in their dorms. They have special speakers come in. But the idea is that they're sort of immersed in the idea of leadership. There's sort of 3 themes to the class, and these are based on some of the literature. It's called the Leadership Challenge. It was based on 3 decades of research around what does leadership mean. So we kind of play on that idea. And the idea of the authors, Kouzes and Posner, was that leadership used to be defined as a set of personality traits. So you had a strong personality, you had, you were a good communicator, you inspired people, but it was a lot of personality traits. And what they argued was it's really about behavior. It's about the way you live. It's about observable behaviors that you can demonstrate and skills that you can train people to understand. So we kind of base it on that approach. And the course is really organized around knowing yourself. So who are you? What are your values? What's important to you? And that's, for college freshmen, kind of an interesting exercise. Sometimes you get a response like, I don't know. Never really thought about that. Who am I? And some students will tell you, yeah, I've had Myers-Briggs, and I've had this, I've done my strengths quest, and I've done all these things, and I know exactly who I am. So you get quite a range. So we spend some time on self-assessments and talking about who are you, how is that demonstrated, can you give me examples? Who's a leader you could tell me about, who inspired you? We talk about that. Then we shift gears and talk about what kinds of skills and competence do leaders need to demonstrate, and we do some readings and some conversations. And then finally we talk about how do you give back, how do you serve the common good. So the Kouzes and Posner site is there if you want to check that. It's called The 5 Practices of Exemplary Leadership. And the way they talk about it is that you need to model the way, so you need to live it. You need to be an exemplar of all this. So clarifying values and living as an example as a leader. The second one is inspiring a shared vision. And around each theme, we have at the end of each section of the class, we have a panel of leaders from around the community. So some of your speakers have, Betty Montgomery and Joanne Davidson have come in a couple of times. Jane Grody-Abel has come in a couple of times. Debbie's been in a number of times. So we try to select speakers in a panel format where they kind of, sort of share ideas and play off of each other. But it's the personal side. So you do the readings and we talk about it, and then we have a panel where people tell their stories in terms of how they inspired a shared vision, for example. I think that is one of Jane Grody-Abel's. So that when the family bought Donato's back, how did she convince family members who had to reinvest in a business that they'd sold? How could she convince them? What was her shared vision that she used to inspire people to reinvest in that vision? Challenging the process. So experimenting and taking risks. My favorite example here of speakers, Elaine Roberts has come into the class several times. Elaine is the head of, it's more than Port Columbus, but it's Columbus Port Authority, is that right, Bill?
It's regional airport.
All right. It's big. And I've learned from listening to Elaine that actually some of the largest airports in the entire country are run by women. So she cites off the list. But my favorite story about this is she was a liberal arts undergrad. And she, by a series of kind of, coincidences and unforeseen opportunities, she landed in transportation at the Indianapolis airport, and then moved to another regional airport, and then came to Port Columbus and everything else that entails. So she's got a big job. But she took some risks. She experimented. It wasn't what she expected when she started out. She thought she wanted to be a social worker, and she just kept sort of shifting gears and following opportunities. So it's always interesting to have the students listen to some of these stories and the way in which people's lives evolve. And a lot of it has to do with what were their core values and how did they migrate through life, looking at those opportunities and weighing and assessing those opportunities. Enabling others to act is that issue of empowerment and inspiring others But giving others voice is part of leadership, and so we do readings and we talk with, again, some of the local speakers about how they have enabled others to act. A lot of this has to do with our mentoring program, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But mentoring is one way that you can enable others to act. Education is another one, obviously. And then the last one of these is encouraging the heart. And this is where we talk about, excuse me, giving back. So you've studied, you've modeled, you've enabled people, you've inspired people. Now, how do you give back? And this is where I often call on people who've served as university trustees. Why do university trustees give back to their institutions? So I use some of our own trustees, and I use trustees of other institutions, people who run nonprofits. Elfie DeBella has come in and talked with folks about the work that the YWCA does. But in each case, they hear personal stories about challenges people have confronted, and a lot of these speakers are women who've encountered significant challenges in terms of leadership in their positions. But the idea is to introduce them to the literature, get them to know themselves, get them to understand the skills that are necessary to be a leader, and then to figure out how do they use that, how do they give back in one way or another. So the next phase of this, so that was just a freshman class, okay? Trying to do something to jump in to the curriculum. And as they're doing the class, the students are also going out, so they are mentoring 8th grade girls. So part of their community engagement and leadership is they have to practice experiential learning. So they go out to some of our local middle schools and they work with 8th grade girls who are at that age where they start to close doors of opportunity. They start to think, I'm not really good at math, or I am good at math, but I don't want anybody to know that. Or this girl's been bullying me and I just want to back off. I don't really want to have to deal with this. Or I don't like my body. I mean, those kinds of things that are very much on the minds of 8th grade girls. It hasn't changed much in a long time. But they go out and they have to develop a relationship with the girls, and then they have to do a unit, some kind of exercise. So a lot of them have done things with social media. So if you're being bullied, how do you deal with that in a social media environment? If you're having body image issues, how do you deal with those kinds of things? So they do a number of interventions that then they have to come back and report to the class. So it's supposed to be a demonstration of learning knowledge about leadership, hearing personal stories about leadership, and then also applying those stories about leadership and those lessons learned in terms of their own mentoring. So at the end of the class, after they go through this experience, and it's a fairly intense experience, some of you heard one of the students from the class speak yesterday. She's now a student trustee at the Welcome Back. But they get introduced to some challenging environments early on. But at the end of the class, then they are assigned, if they choose, a senior mentor from the community. So we have a whole mentoring network out there of volunteers. And Debbie's been one of those volunteers for a long time. And so this is the way it begins to look. So it started as a freshman class. But now we have an Otterbein University Women's Leadership Network Advisory Council, and that is a group of senior women leaders. Debbie serves on that advisory council. Senior women in the Columbus area who tell me kind of what should you be doing? Where are the gaps in terms of women's leadership? Where are the challenges? The first thing I heard was there wasn't any kind of mentoring program, so we've developed a mentoring program from that. But they sit at the 30,000 foot level and provide advice. Then there's a network, that's what the kids wanted to call it, steering committee, which coordinates the initiatives and is a working committee really to advise us. So they take what the advisory council says and put it into action. And the three kinds of experiences that we talk about for the students in the program are network, learning, putting them in situations where they have to learn how to network. That's an important leadership skill. Can't go stand in the corner and, talk only to yourself. Education, so we have a number of educational initiatives, and then transformative experiences, which include the mentoring program, the service learning activities, and the leadership opportunities that students experience. And I can tell you some of the students who are graduates of the class have started student organizations for their global engagement. They've done some fairly amazing things with women's and education groups in developing parts of the world. They've really gone out and explored. They did I think Amelia talked about this yesterday, but They do the sexual assault training program on campus. They took the lead on that as they began to see that as more of an issue on campuses around the country. So they've really taken initiative. They've identified challenges and issues and demonstrated leadership to solve some of those problems. And my class isn't the only group that does these things. That's Otterbein. I just know I've followed these kids for 4 years, so I've begun to see what they've been able to do. And this is what the program begins to look like. So the first year, they have the first year experience, and they are Miller Winter. You should recognize those names. Those are the first two graduates. So they're named after the first two graduates of Otterbein. And they formed, I thought this was kind of neat. The second year, the advisor who works with the students once they graduate from the class came to me and said they want to organize a Sisters in Leadership. So now the upperclassmen take the freshmen under their wing. So it's called SIL, Sisters in Leadership. So they do a number of programs and exercises with them. So they started that on their own. And then it goes through sophomore, junior, and senior year as they begin to practice leadership as undergraduate students. So the idea is that they get the skills and the knowledge and the experiences from their freshman year, and then they begin to apply it through their sophomore, junior, and senior years. So that when they graduate, and the advisory council keeps me clear on this, the mission is to fill the pipeline with young women who are prepared to enter their field with aspirations of becoming leaders. So we know they won't be leaders when they first start, but the idea is they don't shut the door. And that's what happens with so many girls. They shut the door when they're in 8th grade or 6th grade or 12th grade, or when they leave college, or when they're in college. They just keep shutting doors instead of opening doors, instead of pushing through doors. And so that's really the goal of the program. Now, I wanted to say a few words about what's happened since. So this is kind of, again, I want to contextualize this. This is just a microcosm of what's happening at Otterbein generally. So this is what I know, okay? But individual faculty, individual departments have done similar kinds of things with their students, developing them through, let's say, experiences in research labs or experiences in other parts of the institution. How do we prepare students to demonstrate these experiential learning opportunities? How do we encourage them to document them? How do we encourage them to integrate them? The idea is very simple in terms of help them understand who they are, help them understand what is important to them, help them build the skills they need, and then help them apply them and figure out how to give back. And I imagine the same thing, I know we have some folks here from our athletics department. The same thing happens in terms of athletics. They are learning their skills, they're getting to know themselves, they're looking for leaders, they hear people's stories, they see success, they model it, and they demonstrate it, they practice it as they prepare to enter their lives. What's happened beyond, and so again, this is sort of the microcosm, but let me just talk about what this has enabled us to do. So we now have very significant partnerships. I consider our partnership with the Ross Leadership Group a significant partnership that brands Otterbein around this idea of leadership, of creating lifelong learning opportunities, of preparing people to develop new skills to apply them in their own work. And I've taken a lot of notes in these sessions myself. I've learned a lot from some of our speakers. What else does it enable us to do? Well, the mentoring program that started out as a relatively small group of women mentoring our students of 15 to 20 students a year. So now it's getting to be after 4, we'll start our 5th class actually on Wednesday. It enables us to identify a group of, a number of alumni and a number of women leaders have been mentoring our students. But we've now developed partnerships with outside groups. So the Women for Economic and Leadership Development, WELD, and the National Association of Women Business Owners, NABO, are now working with us along with the Women's Small Business Accelerator, which is right across the Alum Creek from us. These are areas of opportunity for us. They're partners who've been really generous with us. So we've hosted 5 leadership conferences for WELD now on the Otterbein campus with 250 women attending each year. They come to Otterbein. They associate Otterbein now with women in leadership, and I hope certainly leadership in general. But they're helping us now to expand our mentoring network. So we will have a new name as something like the Central Ohio Mentoring Network, which will be co-hosted and co-branded by NABO, WELD, Women's Small Business Accelerator, and Otterbein. It associates us with opportunities to develop leadership and to expand our network. And obviously I mentioned the Ross Leadership Hour, so we've partnered with them. I see someone from the city here. We've also developed a strong partnership with the community, the broader community. So one of the panels this year is on collaboration, and the leadership of the Westerville community and the Westerville partnership will be the presenters there. I want the students to get to know Westerville and the importance of developing collaborative partnerships with your neighbors. We need to maintain a very strong relationship with the city of Westerville, with Westerville schools, with the Westerville Library, with the Westerville Chamber, with a number of our partners in the city of Westerville. So we're using this as, again, a way to build our network, to build our brand, to focus on that idea of reaffirming our commitment to experiential learning, and in particular, the concept of developing leaders for the 21st century. Okay, so those partnerships, we're not going to do this all by ourselves is the point, okay? We need to be developing these partnerships and take advantage of the relationships we've built. And a number of you in the room have been instrumental in helping build various kinds of partnerships with various community groups. This is just, again, a little bit of a microcosm. So I'm happy to take questions, or we can talk about any of the ideas. Basically, what we're trying to do is prepare students as we talk about building leadership, give them the skills and experiences and the exposure to those who are playing leadership roles, learning from them, but always the emphasis is on giving back and serving the common good. So I hope you see an alignment of history, values, mission, vision, and the way we implement this in the educational process. Okay? Yeah, Bill.
Commendable program. A question, as you look, what's the gender makeup of Otterbein? And with your heritage and your focus on females, how does that stack up with your peers? Are you much higher?
There's a general trend, Jefferson's sitting here, he's my resident expert, but there's a general trend across the country to be disproportionately female in the undergraduate population. So more women are attending college, more women are attending graduate school, and more women are completing across the board. So we are over 60% female. Now I always add a little footnote. We have big nursing programs, a strong equine program, a strong education program, all of which disproportionately attract women. But it is a general trend across the country. So I guess I should be candid with you about why I started this whole initiative around women in leadership. I'm the first woman president. We have a history around women's leadership, and our archivist has put together a whole history of the way in which women have demonstrated leadership. Our greatest philanthropists at Otterbein have been women. So there's this long history of, when you're a president, you take what you've got. So I took what I had, and I saw this as a way of branding Otterbein in a new and distinct way in the broader community. No one else in higher education, at least in this region, is doing much around women in leadership. And so we've also, I guess one of the partners I didn't mention, in the last summit we did, we've done a women's summit every year. So the last summit we did, we partnered with Bowling Green and Finley, both of the institutions had identified women as their first permanent women presidents about the same time as I came in. And we decided that we wanted to do something to develop the culture around women's opportunities in our institutions, but we didn't want to compete with one another, so we called it Women in Philanthropy. So it was mobilizing our women graduates and supporters as donors and if you look at the statistics on the amount of wealth that women control now and will control in the future, who's going to inherit wealth? It's women. It's millions, well, it's trillions of dollars in wealth in the next couple of decades. Educating women to handle that philanthropy, to leverage that philanthropy, and particularly to get higher education and women's opportunities on their agenda is critical. So we look at partnerships in other ways. But I would say we're disproportionately focused on this because of our history and because of the opportunity that it offered. And also we attract a lot of women who are extremely capable, but they don't, and I would say at Otterbein, because we're so disproportionately female, they tend to get into leadership positions, but it's not always because they see it as their destiny. It's sort of, there's an opportunity and I'll take it, but they're not educated to take full advantage of that and to aspire to it. So I don't know if that helps, but.
Do you have engineering curriculum?
Well, so this is my standard, my stand-up piece is we're starting an engineering program this fall. We expected 32 students. We have 39 students. We're getting a few transfers from other institutions where they can't get access to the classes they need. But my piece of this is I always say we're going to be the only institution in the country that will have more women engineers than men. So we'll see about that. But we just attract a lot of women, but it is a national trend. But yeah, we started systems engineering this fall. We're talking about expanding that into some other areas. We also started business analytics because we think that will attract more male students, and also criminology. Yeah.
My daughter went to women's university. My other daughter went to co-ed university. Mm-hmm. My daughter that went to a women's university went there for the exact reasons that you discussed.
Right.
It occurred to me, I realize there's a tradition here of a co-ed school, but it would seem to me, just given the subject matter, that this school would be better off if it were an all-women's school. Has consideration been given to that?
No. Okay, the question was, given family history and an experience at an all-women's school and a co-ed school, and given our history and the areas we're pursuing, would it make sense for us to go to being a women's college? Sweetbriar, many of you have read Sweetbriar as an all-women's school, just announced they were closing and then at the last minute pulled it out. That's an institution that is really struggling to survive. There's another institution we've been talking with that was all women's, and they have now gone co-ed. There's been a series of schools that has gone co-ed, that have made the decision to go co-ed in just the last few years. Randolph, I think, is one. Wells is another college we've been talking with. They went co-ed in 2005. So the trend has actually been the opposite because there are fewer women who want to be in an exclusively female environment. So there are lots of sociological issues associated with that, as well as economic and other factors. But we haven't. My challenge here, and my male colleagues know this, is let's do something like this for men. Let's make it leadership across the board. So I could do this as the leader of the university. So this is, the staff will tell you, this has mostly been on top of everything else. So it's not like we had a pot of money that we allocated for this. It's let's see if we can get something going that will be interesting, and set a model that can then be replicated around the institution in other ways with other populations. So my goal is to say, don't call it men in leadership, but call it something, and let's have so we have a group now called the Male Experience. Bob, our VP for Student Affairs, led that effort with a group of students a couple of years ago, and they made some recommendations. And it's interesting to me, one of the recommendations was we didn't have a formal student government at the time. We had 2 student trustees and they had full voting privileges and full voice on the board, but that was it. So one of the recommendations was men like to be in elected positions. They like to play leadership roles in formal structures. I don't know why that is, but they do. So the idea was, then let's form a formal student government. So we did. Guess who the first president is? A woman, yeah. But we'll get there. Anyway, I can't explain these things, but anyway, that was one of the things. And then we have some other programs that are developing to help men be more successful. The problem is that I said more women succeed in college. They graduate. A lot of men start college, but a lot of men don't finish. They drop in and they drop out. They see the changes around them. They see women succeeding. And I think for many of them, it's kind of threatening. So it is a challenge, and that's what we've been talking about with the advisory group. This has been great. It's been a lot of fun, and we've done, I think, some really major things. So our last Women's Summit, we had about 350 people here in attendance. And it was interesting because it was intergenerational. So we had middle school girls, high school girls, college girls, and senior women leaders. And during the breaks, it was like, go find a middle school girl and tell her what she ought to be doing to prepare herself to be a leader. And the women, I mean, they just would literally, sort of, I need to talk with you, I need to talk with you. Our provost, Miguel, was recruiting some of these students saying, what do you mean you're going to go to a school you don't know? You're just going to go there because you know the name. You ought to be looking at a place that will create opportunities for you. So we really tried to leverage it in a lot of ways. But the idea is, as I was debriefing with our funders, so we worked with the Benefactor Group, the Women's Fund, Columbus Foundation, Fifth Third Foundation, the Ohio Philanthropy, the Nord Family Foundation. So we had a lot of, and then corporate sponsors from Ernst & Young and Cardinal Health. So we had a lot of people interested in what we were doing. But when I looked at the audience, it was 90% female. And it's not a good situation to be talking just with one group. We need to have men in the audience, we need to have multiple generations in the audience, and we need to be doing this kind of, I'm not telling people in my institution they have to do this, but I think there are opportunities for us to do it more in an integrated and intentional and strategic kind of way. Higher education's a lot of fun these days. It's really challenging these days, but experimentation, risk-taking, those kinds of things, it's not my, I don't know, I'm still in touch with my undergraduate advisor, which is what happens at small colleges. He's over 90 now, and he's guided me through my career. I was going to say it's not my advisor's institution. He always told me, don't go into administration, whatever you do. So, yeah, I went to the dark side. Yeah, Bill.
Well, since I don't see I'll ask a second question, and it comes back to what you just said about administration. Would you contrast required leadership skills, because you were a provost.
I was.
You're now a president. What different leadership skills do you need to do each of those jobs? I don't know much about academia, but my sense is they're totally different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this leads me to a broader comment about higher education. We've always tended to recruit people based on their ability to advance through the ranks in different, so you're an assistant, then you're an associate, then you're a full professor, then you become chair, then you become whatever, and, you know. So I did that, you know, I became a dean, then I became a provost, so I went a very traditional route. But it's, you know, you're measuring and assessing people on what they did in the job requirements that were expected in that particular position. So you don't always have the training you need. So you're exactly right. And Miguel can tell you the provost job is an operational job. My president said to me, your job is to make sure the trains run on time. I want those classes full. I want the faculty held accountable. I want the institution, I want the academic part of the house to run smoothly. That's your job. That's not what you do as president. And I guess this time of year, it always, you know, you always reflect on how many gears did I have to shift today? So 1 minute you're with students, 1 minute you're with administrators, 1 minute you're with staff, 1 minute you're with an alum, 1 minute you get a phone call from the trustee, the next minute you go to see your congressman to lobby, and the next minute you're at a social event where you're just, you know, supposed to be charming and, you know. And, you know, it's kind of like, okay, I have a 15-minute drive. I've got to get my head around that. But it's the pace of change and dealing with different audiences. And I'm not complaining. It's just you have to kind of do that. Alums don't want to hear the same thing that students want to hear. It's not. I don't misrepresent what we're doing, but I tell a different story. And just changing those narratives in your head because of what the audience expectations and interests are. It's just you've got to. And that's the provost. You're just thinking about cost. You know, return on investment, operations, efficiency, morale. You know, you sort of go down the line with your, and it's really pretty much about the faculty. The one thing I'll say about Otterbein, so I was at Indiana University for 13 years. I moved through the academic ranks. And then I moved to Ohio University as Dean of the Scripps College. And two, you know, both state schools and fairly similar in that domain, but in terms of culture, very different cultures. But there was never a good relationship between student affairs and academic affairs because it was very siloed, okay? So I come to Otterbein and it's kind of like, who's in charge of experiential learning? Oh, everybody. So, you know, student affairs owns a piece of it, academic affairs, they can do it in a class or they can do it on their own. So we just work together on it. And that's the I don't know, sort of the charming thing for me about being president at Otterbein is, you know, it is a community. People, it's kind of like, you know, on the cabinet, people work together to solve problems. And that's not traditional in academic culture. It's a pretty siloed business. Now, again, people are starting to change. But at Otterbein, I think we've had a pretty much a community environment really from the get-go. And I think a lot of the innovations have come directly from the faculty, not from the administration. So things like experiential learning, that was really best practice. It was the faculty was saying, you know, where we see the biggest effects are the areas where the students have practiced what they've been learning in the classroom. It's amazing. You know, it's Dewey all over again. They learn by doing. So let's just embrace that and make it part of the curriculum. So I think it's being at a small institution and having that kind of culture.
Any other questions? Oh,
Mr. Long. My stepdaughter went to school here, and I did not know the benefits of going to Otterbein, and I want to thank you for outlining that today, because I thought it would have been a much better value of the time if she went to Ohio State.
Good, we have a convert. Well, I was afraid you were going to say she went here and you were absolutely wrong about everything you've said. So, Kim?
Just as someone, I work for the city, but I really appreciate Otterbein for many reasons, but one is I believe in capitalizing on our intellectual capital here in our community, i.e. let's take advantage of the awesome brains that exist in our community, and I believe in working together. And I also find Dr. Krendl and quite a few others, Rebecca, inspirational, and me as a woman and doing more, being there, doing my best, even when we're doing really boring stuff, like looking at legal agreements about sharing water. But it's really fun. It's really fun to have that type of relationship with the university and with faculty. We have some faculty very much involved in our planning in the community, and it's a lot of fun. It's great.
It's just when we get to parking, that's the only problem. So, Joan, did you have a question?
yeah, just if you could look back on President Krendl on day one, where President Krendl is today, what are the key differences you see?
She's older. She's a lot older. And I can't believe this is, I'm starting my 7th year. In fact, I said to the new faculty the other day, I said, I'm starting my 6th year. And I thought, wait a minute, it's been 7 years. It's been longer than I think. But I think, I'd like to think I'm older and wiser. But I think that I've learned a lot from this community, and that's been great. And that has been, when I talk about community, it's the students, it's the faculty, it's the staff, it's the alumni. They've taught me a great deal. So I hope I've practiced lifelong learning. Yeah.
So, well, thank you very
Okay.
much.